The silence in the debriefing room was thicker than the Afghan mud. Colonel Hayes stared at Eva, the intelligence packet in his hand forgotten. The projector's hum was the only sound, highlighting Anya's smiling face on the wall. Sergeant Henderson stood frozen by the door, his earlier reassurance dying on his lips. Eva didn't wait for their shock to subside. The dam had broken, and a lifetime of buried truth came flooding out. "Her name was Anya," she repeated, the name a sacred, painful thing in the sterile room. "We immigrated when I was 12. She stayed behind to help, to fix things." She turned her gaze from the colonel to the photo, her voice dropping, laced with a history they knew nothing about. "Our father. He was a low-level diplomat who saw the coming storm. He got us out. But Anya, she always felt she had to go back. It was her home, too." Colonel Hayes found his voice, though it was uncharacteristically quiet. "Captain Rostova, this is—" "I had no idea. The file doesn't say that I joined the army because of her," Eva interrupted, her eyes blazing as she turned back to him. "It doesn't say that every language I learned, every regional specialty I cultivated, was a thread I was following to find the man who took her. Viper isn't just a target, sir. His real name is Arkady Volkov. He was Spetsnaz, a ghost from the old war who found new monsters to serve." The colonel's face hardened, the sympathy in his eyes replaced by cold, tactical assessment. "Rostova, you know what this means? You are compromised. Your judgment, your objectivity, they are no longer viable assets on this operation." He straightened his shoulders, his decision made. "As of this moment, you are officially off the task force. You are to hand over all related intelligence and stand down. That is a direct order." The words hit her like a physical blow, but she didn't flinch. "Sir, with all due respect, I am the only one who can find him now." "You're looking for a modern insurgent. I'm hunting a Soviet-era wolf. He thinks in a different language." "That's enough, Captain." The colonel's voice cracked like a whip. "This is not a discussion. Your personal vendetta could get people killed. My decision is final. You are off this op." He strode from the room, the door clicking shut with a sound of absolute finality. The moment he was gone, the rigid strength in Eva's posture wavered. She leaned heavily on the table, her head bowed. Mike approached her slowly, like one would approach a wounded animal. "Eva, why didn't you ever tell me? What was I supposed to say, Mike?" She whispered, not looking at him. "That my entire career was a lie? A cover for a revenge mission?" "It's not a lie," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "It's a reason. A damn good one, but the colonel is right. You go after him like this, with this fire in your eyes, and you'll burn yourself and anyone with you to the ground. They'll court-martial you. They'll throw away the key." Eva finally looked at him, and the raw pain in her eyes was more terrifying than any enemy fire he'd ever faced. "Don't you see? It doesn't matter anymore. For years he was a ghost, a theory. Today I had him in my sights. I let him go. I failed her. Again." She pushed off the table, her resolve crystallizing back into something hard and unbreakable. "Some debts can't be paid with a salute and a mission accomplished." She walked out of the debriefing room, leaving Mike standing alone in the humming silence. He looked at the projector, at the face of the sister he never knew existed, and then at the door where Eva had disappeared. He knew his friend, his partner. He knew that look. The mission was over for the United States Army. But for Eva Rostova, it had just become everything. The silence of her quarters was a stark contrast to the roaring in her ears. Eva stood before the small, laminated photograph tucked into the frame of her mirror. It was her and Anya, ages 8 and 10, squinting against a sun that belonged to a different world, a different life. Her sister's arm was thrown around her shoulder, a gesture of eternal, unshakable protection. That debt had now come due. The colonel saw a compromised asset. Mike saw a friend on a suicide run. But Eva saw only the path, a trail not of digital footprints, but of psychological ones. She opened her personal footlocker, pushing aside standard-issue gear to reveal a collection that would have baffled any inspector. Faded topographical maps from the Soviet era, their Cyrillic labels faded. Dog-eared books on Cold War Spetsnaz tactics and operational psychology. This was her real arsenal. While the task force would be scouring satellite feeds for a heat signature and monitoring cell towers for a whisper, she knew Arkady Volkov would be thinking in a different century. He was a creature of the old way, a man who trusted stone and shadow over signals and silicon. He wouldn't flee to a bustling city or a remote village. He would seek sanctuary in the corpse of the empire that created him. She spread the largest, most worn map across her bunk. It showed the Hindu Kush not as a modern borderland, but as a Soviet military district. Her finger, calloused and steady, traced a thin, almost invisible line, a supply route for a forgotten outpost. The official files listed the Zamorai communications, relay as abandoned and dismantled in 1988, but she had cross-referenced declassified satellite, imagery from the 90s with geological survey maps. The main structure, carved into the mountain itself, was still there, a perfect ghost. A soft knock came at her door. She didn't need to answer to know it was Mike. He entered, his large frame filling the doorway. His eyes went from her face to the sprawling map, the old books, and the determined set of her shoulders. He saw she was already packing a rucksack with non-issued gear, climbing rope, extra water purification tablets, a high-density energy bar she'd bought off base. "They're going to notice you're gone, Ava. This isn't a field trip. They'll send someone. They'll—" His voice trailed off, the unspoken consequence hanging between them. Court-martial, prison, the end of everything she had built. Eva didn't look up from her packing. She secured a compact survival knife to her vest. "Some debts are personal, Mike." Her voice was quiet, but it had the resonance of forged steel. He stepped fully into the room and closed the door. "Tell me what you see." She finally met his gaze. "I see a fox returning to its den." "Not a new one." "An old one. A familiar one. The task force is looking for a needle in a haystack. I'm walking to the magnet." She tapped the location on the map. "He's here. I know it." Mike stared at the map, then back at her. He saw the absolute, unshakable certainty in her eyes. This wasn't the grief-stricken rage he'd seen in the debriefing room. This was the cold, focused calculation of a master hunter. She had already left them behind, both the colonel's orders and his own friendship. She was already on the trail. He let out a long, slow breath, a sigh of surrender to the inevitable. He knew in that moment that he could not stop her. The only choice left was whether he would be the one to sound the alarm. "They'll have a drone in the air at first light to sweep the primary escape routes," he said, his voice now low and practical. "If you're going to move, it has to be now. In this weather, they won't expect that." Ava gave a single, sharp nod. She shouldered her pack, its weight a comfort. Mike's hand went to his radio, his thumb resting on the call button. But he didn't press it. Instead, he looked her dead in the eye. "I'll give you a 12-hour head start. That's all I can do. After that, I have to report you AWOL." It was more than she had any right to ask for. It was a debt of its own. Without another word, Eva moved past him and out into the dim, rain-swept corridor. She didn't look back. The door to her old life closed behind her with a soft, definitive click. The hunter had been unleashed, and her prey was waiting in the bones of the past. The rain had become her world, a constant, drumming companion that erased the past and the future, leaving only the brutal, soaking present. Ava moved like a wraith through the jagged landscape, a solitary figure against the immense, brooding mountains. The ghillie suit was a leaden weight, the straps of her pack digging into her shoulders with every step up the treacherous, slippery slope. This was not the way a modern soldier traveled. This was the path of a ghost, walking through the graveyard of a dead empire. Her mind was a focused instrument, ticking off the landmarks from her memory of the faded map. A lightning-blasted pine, a dry riverbed that would funnel the runoff into a torrent. She avoided the paths, knowing they would be the first place any drone would scan. Instead, she moved across the rock faces and through the thickest stands of trees, her progress slow, deliberate, and utterly relentless. Each labored breath was a prayer. Each squelching step in the mud was a promise. The cold was a living thing, gnawing at her fingers and toes, seeping through the layers of Gore-Tex and wool. She welcomed it. The discomfort was an anchor, tethering her to the mission, burning away the last vestiges of doubt. She thought of Anya, not as the victim in the photograph, but as the big sister who had taught her to skip stones on a lake a lifetime ago. She remembered the sound of her laughter, a bright, clear bell in the quiet of their garden. That memory was a small, warm ember in the vast, cold darkness of the Afghan night. It was not a memory of loss, but of what had been taken, and it fueled the fire in her soul. After 6 hours of grueling ascent, she found it. The entrance to the Samurai communications relay was not a door, but a wound in the mountain. A rusted iron gate, twisted and hanging from one hinge, lay half-concealed by a landslide of scree and thorny bushes. It was exactly as she had pictured it, a perfect, forgotten tomb. She crouched in the cover of the rocks, her body trembling not from fear, but from a surge of vindication. The task force was scanning the horizon, while her prey was hidden in the earth itself. She unslung her rifle, the familiar weight a comfort in her hands. The time for tracking was over. The time for the hunt had begun. She approached the entrance with a predator's patience, her senses stretched to their limit. The only sound was the relentless hiss of the rain on stone. There were no fresh footprints in the mud, no discarded equipment, no sign of a modern presence. It was exactly what a man like Volkov would want. Slipping through the broken gate, she was swallowed by a profound darkness that smelled of damp concrete, rust, and age. She clicked on her tactical light, the beam cutting a narrow swath through the oppressive black. The corridor ahead was a testament to Soviet brutalism. Decaying concrete, bundles of wire ripped from the walls for copper, and the skeletal remains of old communication equipment. She moved with painstaking slowness, her weapon tracking with her eyes. Every shadow was a potential threat, every drip of water a potential footfall. The facility was a labyrinth, a rabbit warren of empty rooms and collapsed corridors. She followed the path a seasoned soldier would take, seeking the heart of the complex, the command center that would offer the best defensible position and a view of the approach. And then she saw it. A faint flickering glow from the end of a long hallway, not the steady white of electric light, but the warm, dancing orange of a flame. A kerosene lamp or a candle? Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat that echoed in the silence. She extinguished her light, plunging herself back into near-total darkness, and advanced, using the glow as her guide. She reached a heavy metal door, slightly ajar. Through the crack, she could see a figure standing before a large paper map tacked to a corkboard. He was tall, with a lean, wiry frame, his back to her. He held himself with the easy, coiled grace of a lifelong warrior. Eva took a final, silent breath, the ghost of her sister's name on her lips. She leveled her rifle, her finger settling on the trigger. The moment of reckoning was here, in this tomb of concrete and memories. She pushed the door open, the creak of its rusted hinges a gunshot in the silence. The man did not startle. He did not spin around in panic. He simply went still, then slowly, deliberately, raised his hands. "Captain Rostova," a calm, accented voice echoed in the chamber. He had not even turned to look. "I have been waiting a very long time for you." The air in the command center was thick with dust and the acrid smell of kerosene. Arkady Volkov stood with his back to her, his hands raised in a gesture that was neither surrender nor fear, but simple, unnerving acknowledgement. He slowly turned to face her. He was older than she had imagined, his face a roadmap of scars and hard living, but his eyes were the pale, calculating eyes of the wolf she had hunted. "You are predictable." "Captain," he said, his voice a low rumble. The child in Samurai was an interesting variable, but your presence here, it was inevitable. "I knew your father, you see," a weak man who fled with his tail between his legs. But he had 2 daughters with fire in their blood. Eva kept her rifle steady, the red dot of her sight painted squarely on his chest. "You murdered my sister." Volkov gave a dismissive wave of his raised hand. Anya Rostova was a complication. She saw things she was not meant to see at that clinic. She was not a target of passion. She was a loose end, a piece of operational housekeeping. The cold, clinical description of her sister's death was like a physical blow. It stripped Anya of her humanity, her life, her smile, and reduced her to a tactical problem that had been solved. Rage, hot and blinding, surged through Eva's veins. It would be so easy. A twitch of her finger. Justice. Revenge. They would be the same thing. Go on, Volkov taunted, his lips curling into a thin smile. He could see the storm in her eyes. Take your shot. It is what you came for. It is what she would have wanted, no? To see her little sister become an avenging angel. He was playing her. He was trying to strip away her training, to reduce her to the grieving little sister. She tightened her grip on the rifle, her knuckles white. The professional soldier in her screamed to hold the line, to take him alive. The grieving sister demanded blood. You think this is about revenge? Ava's voice was tight, strained against the pressure building inside her. Is it not? He chuckled, a dry, rasping sound. You are not here under orders. You are here because of a ghost. That makes you emotional, and emotion makes you weak. He took a slow, deliberate step to the side, revealing a small metallic device on the table behind him. It was crude but unmistakable, a dead man's switch. You can kill me, Captain, but the moment my hand leaves this trigger, the explosives I have placed throughout this facility will detonate. This valley will become a tomb for you, and for the loyal team I know is coming to rescue you. As if on cue, the faint but distinct thrum of helicopter rotors began to beat the air in the distance. Mike. He was early. He was coming for her. Volkov's smile widened. So you see? Your choice is simple. You can have your revenge and die a murderer, killing your comrades in the process. Or you can be a good soldier and lower your weapon. But then, you will have failed your sister twice. What will it be, Captain Rostova? The soldier or the avenger? Ava's world narrowed to the two impossible paths before her. The red dot on his chest trembled with the pounding of her heart. The sound of the approaching helicopter grew louder, a timer counting down to a terrible decision. She looked into the eyes of the man who had destroyed her family, who now held the lives of her friends in his hand. He had engineered this perfect trap, counting on her personal hatred to be his final victorious weapon. The red dot from her sight danced on Volkov's chest. A tiny, trembling star of potential death. The thrum of the helicopter was a physical vibration in the air now, a promise of rescue that had become a death knell. Volkov's pale eyes held hers, gleaming with triumph. He had built a perfect box around her, where every choice led to ruin. Pull the trigger and she murdered her friends. Lower the rifle, and she surrendered her sister's memory to the monster who erased her. Her finger tightened. The pressure was a mere ounce from catastrophe. She saw Anya's face, not in the grim victim photo, but as it was in life, full of light, of a stubborn belief in helping people. Anya, who had crossed the world not to destroy but to heal. What would that woman want? For her little sister to become a suicide bomber? To slaughter comrades in a blind rage? No, that was Volkov's world. A world of ashes. In that suspended second, Ava's entire being recalibrated. This was not a choice between being a soldier and an avenger. It was a choice between his darkness and her sister's light. Revenge would mean Volkov had won. He would have succeeded in extinguishing the last of Anya's goodness in the world, which lived on now only in Ava's soul. Her finger relaxed. It moved from the trigger to the selector switch on her rifle, clicking it to safe with a sound that was louder than any gunshot in the tense silence. Volkov's smug expression flickered. This was not the reaction he had engineered. In one fluid, shocking motion, Eva slung her rifle onto her back and raised her empty hands. "You're wrong, Volkov," she said, her voice clear and steady, cutting through the drone of the approaching helicopter. This was never about revenge. It was about justice, and justice doesn't end in a tomb. It gets a trial. His confidence cracked, replaced by a flicker of confusion. His plan depended on her rage. Eva didn't attack him. She attacked his plan. Her free hand went to her tactical radio, her eyes never leaving his. Ghost 1 to all elements, emergency traffic. The objective is the Soviet comms outpost at grid Zebra 79er. The structure is rigged for demolition with a dead man's switch. I say again, the target is holding a dead man's switch. All units stand by for structural schematics and disable procedures. Do not, I repeat, do not initiate breach until primary charge is neutralized. She was no longer a lone hunter. In an instant, she had reverted to her true self. Captain Rostova, the JTAC, the guardian angel. She was feeding the entire tactical picture to the team outside. turning Volkov's fortress into a known, solvable problem. The roar of the helicopter was directly overhead now, the downdraft whipping dust and debris through the broken windows. Shadows of fast-roping figures flickered past. Volkov stared at her, his hand still clenched around the switch, but the power had drained from his gesture. He was no longer a puppet master holding all the strings. He was just a man in a room, surrounded by the enemy he had tried to force her to kill. The sheer, illogical defiance of her choice, to choose her duty and her comrades over the blood feud he offered, had broken him. "She would be ashamed of you," he spat. A last, desperate attempt to wound her. Eva took a step forward, her empty hands still raised, but her posture was one of victory. "No," she said, her voice soft but absolute. "For the first time since you took her, I am finally certain that I have made her proud." The door behind Volkov exploded inward. In a blur of controlled violence, two figures tackled him to the ground. There was a brief, fierce struggle, the crack of a dislocated shoulder, and a pained grunt from Volkov. The dead man's switch was pried from his grip, rendered inert. Sergeant Mike "Duke" Henderson stood over the subdued form of Arkady Volkov, his chest heaving. He looked at Eva, who still stood with her hands in the air, her face a mask of exhausted peace. He gave her a slow, solemn nod. It wasn't a salute between a sergeant and a captain. It was a nod between equals, between partners. It was a recognition that she had won a battle he could never have fought for her, and she had won it by being the better soldier and the better sister. The ceremony was not in a grand hall, but in the colonel's office. There was no press, no band, no rows of dress uniforms. The air still smelled of dust and coffee. Captain Eva Rostova stood at attention, her uniform clean, but bearing the faint scars of recent field use. Before her, Colonel Hayes stood behind his desk, his expression unreadable. Sergeant Henderson and the other members of her team lined the walls, a silent, solemn honor guard. "Captain Rostova," the colonel began, his voice formal. "The charges of insubordination and going AWOL are serious. They cannot be simply ignored." He paused, letting the weight of the words settle. However, the capture of a high-value target like Arkady Volkov and the intelligence gleaned from the Zamorai site is a strategic victory of the highest order. Your actions, while in direct violation of orders, yielded a result that saved the lives of your teammates and removed a significant threat. He picked up a small velvet box from his desk. He did not open it. "There will be no public medal for this. The official record will state that the operation was a sanctioned high-risk raid. To do otherwise would be to acknowledge your methods, and we cannot encourage others to follow them." He held the box out to her. "But understand this, Captain." "What you did?" "The choice you made in that room when you lowered your rifle, that is the very definition of honor and courage. It is a lesson every soldier should learn, but few are ever tested on. This is for your sister." Eva took the box. She didn't open it. She didn't need to. The weight of it, the meaning behind it, was enough. It was not a reward for her. It was a marker for Anya. "Thank you, sir." Later, alone in her quarters, she finally placed the box on her footlocker, unopened. Next to it, she placed the two things that truly mattered. The worn, laminated photograph of two young girls forever smiling in the sun. And beside it, the inert dead man's switch, a stark, metallic trophy from the tomb where she had finally laid her ghosts to rest. She picked up the photo, her thumb gently tracing her sister's face. The hollow ache that had lived in her chest for years was gone. It had not been filled with vengeance, but with a quiet, enduring peace. She had not killed the monster. She had captured him. She had brought him into the light of law and judgment, the very principles her sister had believed in. In doing so, she had not avenged Anya's death. She had honored her life. A soft knock came at the door. Mike stood there, out of uniform, a duffel bag slung over his shoulder. "You ready to go home?" he asked. Eva looked around the sparse room, her gaze finally resting on the photograph and the switch. The mission had failed until she made it personal, and it had only succeeded because, in the end, she remembered that some debts are paid not with a bullet, but with a choice. A choice to be better than the darkness? "Yes," she said. a genuine weary smile touching her lips for the first time in a very long while. "I'm ready." She picked up her own bag and walked out of the room, not looking back. She left the unopened metal box on the footlocker. She didn't need a piece of metal to remember. She had everything she needed right in her pocket, next to her heart. The mission was over. The war for her was finally won. The rain wasn't just water. It was a relentless, drumming curtain of ice that blurred the world into shades of gray and green. It soaked through the ghillie suit, plastered the stray strands of dark hair to her forehead, and seeped into her bones with a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. Captain Eva Rostova ignored it all. Her universe had narrowed to the circle of her high-powered scope and the steady, calming pressure of her own heartbeat. The village of Zamorai lay below, a cluster of mud brick compounds clinging to the rugged Afghan hillside like ancient lichen. Ghost 1 to Spectre. "Confirm visual on primary structure," she murmured into her headset, her voice a low, steady monotone that betrayed none of the coiled tension in her frame. The compound, designated Eagle's Nest, was their target. Inside was a ghost they called Viper, a high-value target whose capture was deemed critical to regional stability. Solid copy. "Ghost 1, we have eyes." The voice of Sergeant Mike Duke Henderson. Her point man crackled back, calm and professional. "Moving to entry vector now." Eva watched the 4 dark shapes of her team move with fluid, predatory grace through the village's outer alleys. They were shadows, phantoms in the afternoon deluge. Her job was to be their guardian angel, their unseen sword. She called the shots, guided the strikes, and held the power of an airstrike in the palm of her hand. She was the ghost in the machine, and the machine was humming perfectly. "Stand by for breach in 3, 2, 1. The muffled crack of the breaching charge echoed faintly even from her position 500 meters away. The team flowed into the compound's courtyard. The mission clock was ticking. Silence stretched for a moment, punctuated only by the hiss of the rain and the static in her ear. Then Duke's voice returned, tighter this time. "Courtyard clear," moving to inner structure. Eva's finger rested lightly alongside the trigger guard of her rifle. Her breathing was even. This was the moment. The culmination of weeks of planning, of sleepless nights, of intelligence cross-referenced 100 times. Viper was cornered. Success was a tangible thing just seconds away. "Contact! Northwest corner!" Another voice, sharp and urgent, cut through the comms. The sharp, distinctive rattle of AK-47 fire erupted, answered immediately by the controlled bursts of her team's M4s. "Ghost 1, we are pinned. Requesting immediate suppression on my mark." Duke's voice was a bark, all business. Eva's world became pure mathematics. She adjusted the windage on her scope a fraction, her eyes never leaving the window where the enemy fire originated. "Spectre is hot. I have the solution. Say the word. Mark! Northwest window, 2nd floor." She took a breath, let half of it out, and began the smooth, steady pressure on the trigger. Her crosshairs were locked. The shot was hers. It was clean. And then, movement. A tiny figure, a blur of faded red and blue, darted from a low doorway directly into the line of fire between her team and the insurgents. A child. A little boy, no more than 5, frozen in terror in the middle of the killing zone. The rules of engagement, drilled into them until they were as instinctual as breathing, flashed in her mind. Positive identification of hostile intent. No civilian collateral damage. "Abort! Abort! Hold your fire!" Duke's command was instantaneous. Eva's finger froze. The perfect shot evaporated. The mathematical certainty of the mission dissolved into the chaotic, heartbreaking reality of war. She watched, helpless, as the team ceased fire, their advance halted. In that single, suspended moment of humanity, the opportunity was lost. From the back of the compound, a figure, lean and swift, vaulted over a low wall and disappeared into the maze of alleys behind the village. Viper, escaping because of a child's fear. The firing from the house stopped. The team secured the child, their movements now slow, heavy with the weight of what had just happened. Ghost 1. Target has exfiltrated. I say again, the eagle has flown the nest. Duke's voice was flat, drained. The mission is a scrub. Ava slowly lifted her head from the scope. The rain stung her eyes. She stared down at the village, now quiet except for the falling rain that seemed to be washing away all traces of their failure. The mission had failed. Not from a lack of skill or planning or courage. It had failed because of a single unpredictable moment of mercy. She lay there in the mud, the cold finally seeping into her heart, the ghost of a perfect shot haunting her. The professional in her accepted the outcome, but a deeper, colder part of her, a part she rarely acknowledged, began to stir. It was a feeling she hadn't felt in a very long time. It was the beginning of something personal. The ride back to Bagram Airfield was a tomb on wheels. The armored vehicle rattled and groaned, but inside, the silence was heavier than any metal. No one looked at each other. The stink of wet gear, cordite, and sweat was a perfume of failure. Ava sat rigid, her hands resting on her knees, feeling the phantom kick of the rifle she never fired. She replayed the moment in her mind, the crosshairs, the child, the fleeting shadow of Viper escaping. A professional accepts the variables. A professional understands the rules. But the hollow ache in her chest felt anything but professional. The debriefing room was stark, lit by the sterile glow of fluorescent lights. The unit commander, Colonel Hayes, stood before them, his face a granite mask of disappointment. "The restraint you showed was commendable and correct," he began, his voice echoing in the tense space. "You adhered to the rules of engagement. You protected a non-combatant. That is what separates us from them." He paused, letting the words hang. "However, the strategic outcome is a severe setback. Viper is in the wind. The network remains active. The mission, by its primary objective, was a failure." Ava kept her eyes fixed on the map of Zamarai projected on the wall, the compound now just an empty icon. She felt the eyes of her teammates, a mixture of frustration and shared resignation. Sergeant Mike Duke Henderson sat beside her, his large frame slumped in a chair. He leaned over, his voice a low rumble meant only for her. "It was the only call, Eva. No one could have taken that shot." "We did the right thing." Ava gave a single tight nod. "The right thing." The words felt like ash in her mouth. Colonel Hayes switched the screen. "This is the updated intelligence packet on the target. Study it. Understand who we're up against." A series of grim photographs flashed up. Weapons caches, ambushed convoys. Then the screen shifted to victim profiles, a tactic used to harden resolve, to remind them of the human cost. Ava's breath hitched. Her professional detachment, the wall she had so carefully maintained, cracked. There, amidst the faces of unknown villagers and aid workers, was a face she knew. A young woman with a bright, hopeful smile, her hair catching the sun. Anya, her sister. The world seemed to tilt, the fluorescent lights buzzing like angry hornets. The colonel's voice became a distant drone. The packet listed Anya Rostova, a relief worker with a medical NGO, as one of Viper's confirmed victims during a raid on a clinic 6 months prior. The official report had been vague, citing crossfire. Now, Ava knew the truth. It wasn't crossfire. It was him, a coldness, sharper and more profound than the Afghan rain, settled in her core. The failed mission was no longer a professional setback. It was a personal taunt. Viper hadn't just escaped them today. He had stolen from her long before she ever set foot in this country. Her drive to learn the language, her obsession with the region's conflicts, her entire military career, it had all been a winding path leading to this moment, to this man. The debrief ended. The team filed out, their boots scuffing against the polished floor. Ava remained seated, paralyzed, her eyes locked on her sister's smiling face. Duke lingered by the door. "Ava, you coming?" She didn't answer. She couldn't. He took a step back into the room, his expression shifting from concern to confusion as he saw the look on her face. "Ava, what is it?" Slowly, she rose from her chair. Her movements were stiff, robotic. She walked to the front of the room and stood before the projection, her shadow falling across her sister's image. "Captain?" Colonel Hayes asked, gathering his notes. Eva pointed a trembling finger at the screen. "Her name," Eva's voice was a raw whisper, was Anya Rostova. She turned to face the colonel, and the storm of grief and fury in her eyes made the seasoned officer take an involuntary step back. She was my sister. The silence in the room was absolute. The professional facade of the military briefing shattered, replaced by the stark human reality of a decades-old wound, ripped open. Viper didn't just kill an aid worker, Eva continued, her voice gaining a terrible steel-edged strength. He murdered my family, and I just let him get away.